Now, welcome along. So the inter-county season 2026 gets underway this weekend. The National Leagues kick off, and we are excited to say the least. If we can pick up where we left off with the club championship and not least the inter-county season last year, then it should be a very, very enjoyable first couple of months in Gaelic games. We're going to focus on the football today. We'll get stuck into the hurling next week. And we'll do our best. I think realistically all four divisions might be beyond us and all teams might be beyond us, but we'll certainly go through Division 1 and 2 in a bit of depth. Our GAA podcast coverage is sponsored by AIB. They are proud sponsors of the All-Ireland Club Championships for men's football, hurling, ladies football and camogie. AIB celebrate the joy, dedication and support that lies at the heart of Gaelic games in every community and every player. And you can check out the AIB GAA social channels for more. For people who've been waiting since July for their inter-county fix, it's been a long wait. A long, dark winter, a miserable January, but we're set to go.
I think the club finals kind of got us over the slump a small bit, did they?
They did, yeah. They caught the national mood, I think, yeah.
I thought it was the best club championship I have seen.
Yeah.
Club football championship. I think it's probably a follow-on from the rules, but just the level of drama, the level of entertainment. Pretty good standard set by Ballyboden, I thought. I thought they'd go on and win it. And then they were beaten down in Cork. But I thought all round,
just so primarily
it is as good as I've seen and maybe better. I can't make a case for a better All-Ireland Club Football Championship at senior level. And I suppose to drop down with on Gaeltacht too, but that was an awful final.
Well, it's hard not to conclude it is the rules, no?
It probably is. Yeah, I think it's a follow-on from it. I think clubs are well able to adapt and take the 2 pointers. The whole campaign was marked by 2 pointers, whether it was Rory Fallon or Paul Ganey in Cork or Rory Beggan up in Armagh. I think it was underpinned by 2 pointers, and I think it'll be a very, very big factor in the season ahead, because even more than last year, I expect an even greater pivot to 2 pointers on the balance of everything. And we've spoken about it before here, the overvalue of it compared to a 3-point goal now. I think teams are really going to focus on them.
Yeah. Well, you know, it was funny. I was just thinking back for a lot of last year, we were having conversations. I mean, right into the teeth of the summer, and there was, God, it's hard to pick a winner. It's the most open championship we've ever seen. It was a very, very common refrain. And then Kerry did what they did in that third quarter against Armagh, and then they won the final comprehensively. And now it just, from this vantage point, seems inevitable. Like, of course, Conán, they were the best team in the country. And now, I mean, a little because of the clubs have won, Paul Ganey's the captain, Jack O'Connor's staying on. They're everybody's favourites this season. It's now not the most open championship of all time. It's Kerry are on a heater.
The coach of the last All-Ireland winners, Kieran Donaghy, has come and joined them there as well. There's a different dynamic there. You're right, I think Kerry are still ahead of everybody, but I know we said it last year, it was an open championship. I think it's even more open. No, I genuinely do. I think Kerry are above, but there is that question mark now about hunger and will you go to the well when you really have to? And they will have to at some stage during the championship, and they had the bit between their teeth. They had all the Ulster teams lined up in front of them in the knockout stages. It was perfectly lined up for them to go in there with that fire in their belly. So will they get that again coming down the straights? They definitely could, but I think just below them, it is so even. It's gotten more even, and it's gotten broader as well. I think there's more teams in that mix.
But there's always been a thing about Kerry for the last kind of 15, maybe 20 nearly years where, you know, a Mickey Hart comes along or a Jim McGuinness comes along, and like Kerry are so devout to their principles that, like, eventually when they realise they need to switch something, they switch it. Whereas this time the rules changed for everybody, and everybody had the same starting point. Everybody had to conceive of the best way to play. And actually, by the time they got to the All-Ireland last year, Kerry didn't just have the best squad of players, they had the best game plan as well. They got their best 2-point kickers on the ball in the most efficient way possible. So, you know, from that old sort of thing of a new manager coming along and pulling the rug from underneath the likes of Kerry, who have to kind of, you know, retrospectively adapt or change. You know, remember the game plan that they put up against Donegal in the 14 final when they kept their 6 fellas back. They were at the same starting gate this time last year. And even the thing about the rules is you have to remember the last tweak to those rules came, I think, the weekend of the preliminary quarterfinals. So like 3/4 of the the inter-county year last year was played with rules that were actually changing around them. So you'd imagine we'll see a bit more of a kind of a settled thing. I mean, I don't know, will we see the same... This time last year, we had some of the most bizarre games we've ever seen. Teams coming from 10, 12 points down with the win to come back and win those games. So it'll just be interesting to see the extent to which teams have adapted. And, you know, if we don't get those big reversals where the team with the win goes 12 points up and then loses by 1, you know that they've got their kind of heads around it. That'll be a good early season kind of a barometer of how...
You must know the wind isn't going to be blowing for the next 9 weeks. I think it'll be a replica of last year. I think the same trends will happen.
But I just mean to be better at getting their kick out. Like I think, you know, a lot of that came down to the kick out, and I think most teams will have some sort of an out ball on the kick out. I can't see there being quite the same.
I think they'll be slightly better, but I think it is very, very difficult because teams are so good at defending kick-outs now, or putting the press on. They're really, really good at that. Kerry have always been adaptable, the most adaptable county, and obviously the most successful, but also the most adaptable. Whatever has come at them, whether it was Dublin in the 50s or down in the 60s and Dublin again in the 70s and then Tyrone in the 2000s, there's always a response. And you mentioned 2014, that was a response to a certain way to play the game as well. And they have adapted fast. Ultimately, they have adapted the quickest to these rules with the twos. Even from the point of view of getting last year's All-Ireland final, one memory stands out is the player marking Michael Murphy, whoever it was making that run to put him under pressure, to get the short kick out. They had so much thought of, and I think they'll advance that again. So they are the team to beat, no question. And they're at peak maturity, because a lot of those players were part of 2014, 2015 All-Ireland minor titles. That's a decade ago and more now. They're in their late 20s. You have a player like Tom O'Sullivan who missed the closing stages of last year's All-Ireland Championship, didn't start the semi-final or final, went off injured against Armagh, and to be putting him back in the team now after the club campaign he's had. So a lot of them are around 28, 29, obviously Clifford at 26, Sean O'Shea around 27, so it's set up for them.
Well, they're in Division 1 with Donegal, Dublin, Galway, Armagh, Mayo, Monaghan, Roscommon. Just in broad terms, Division 1 and beyond, but what kind of a campaign do you all anticipate, not least with Championship following, not as quickly, but reasonably quickly after the finale of the leagues? Is this a case of a whole bunch of these Division 1 teams secure Division 1 status next year, handbrake comes up, all of these kind of trends will continue? Are there teams there that will be going all out to win this thing? Where is the status of a league title?
I think for some it depends. Everyone wants a fast start. If you look at Donegal last year, they played the 3 All-Ireland champions from the 3 previous years, beat them all, and then the handbrake came up against Galway in Salt Hill. And then they did enough, and they could have reached the final on the last day had they gone and really pressed down hard against Mayo, put out their best team and gone for it. They were in a final and Mayo were gone. As it happened, Mayo won that game, got into the final almost by accident. And Kerry got into that final almost by accident.
Kerry had a relegation problem at one
They were at one stage. So Mayo, with 10 minutes to go in the last round last year, Mayo were in 7th, ready for the drop. And the way things changed in all the fixtures last year, they end up in the final.
The way you describe that makes it sound, God, this competition's amazing. But it's actually
it's not.
It's an indictment
It is because it becomes the slow bicycle race. It's almost cartoonish. They're veering over the cliff and they start to put the brakes on, and some will go over the cliff, others won't. Will just manage to pull up the brakes.
Over the cliff is into a final.
Into the final. Yeah.
Terrible fate. But it's interesting. That wasn't picked up as much last year. It was a Donegal in that game that they clearly didn't want to win. And if you think of the heat that came under Leitrim and Stephen Poacher for forfeiting the match, like this was worse. Like they were going in and playing. Well, it's just the same. Like they're playing a match that they don't want to win.
Well, legally, I just want to say Donegal did want to win the match. Of course they did.
I was about to say it, Joe.
They really did.
Well, I don't think. But they were certainly not as vigorous in pursuit of victory, shall we say, as they were in the subsequent championship.
Yeah.
So you'd anticipate vaguely same.
The only thing I'd say about that is I'm not sure. Just looking at it from, and this is like well removed, but from all the All Ireland contenders, bar Kerry, who are in like they're champions, so take them out of this broad brushstroke. But I'm not sure that any of those Division 1 teams can necessarily afford to absorb a really bad league. You know, whatever about winning a few games, staying up and pulling the handbrake. If teams go out on their merits and try and win those games and lose 5 or 6 games in a row, I'm not sure there's any of those teams that are steady enough on their feet just to shrug it off. Like, there were years where you might have said even about Dublin, okay, well, Dublin can do what they want because they'll move up through the gears in Leinster, but that's not even the case anymore. You wouldn't be taking anything for granted with Dublin this year or in Leinster. And the Kerry thing is interesting because they're going into this, as we all think, the best team in the country, but they're also the profile, as Colm said, for the age profile, where they've been around and they've done everything. And like, there was a while there when Dublin came back as All-Ireland champions and would win the following year's league. And it was such a statement. Like, everybody was in no two minds going into the championship. And whether they deliberately did it that way or they just won the league by virtue of being the best team, it really kind of re-emphasised that. And I think that would be a useful thing for Kerry to do this year. I think there's more worth out of having a good league and possibly even winning it for Kerry this year than there is in years when they don't come into it as champions.
There's also the factor of Jack O'Connor's perfect record as a league and championship winner back to back. And these things don't really matter, and they don't, but they just always matter slightly more in Kerry, of all places, that these nuggets just mean something. League and championship double. If you've done it the 5 years that the same manager has been in charge and you want to win a sixth, well, the path through that is the league. And I think the feel-good factor, you mentioned it from the clubs, I think that just carries them along as well.
It's a useless point, but when I saw Paul Gainey captain, I thought, oh, there's good vibes around that. I really did. What's Kieran Donaghy's role, by the way, to finish off the Kerry chat? I asked him on the show, and in fairness, he said, look, it's a little early for me to do a media tour. I'd like to, I'd earn my stripes before I'm like telling everyone how great I am and everything. What exactly is Donaghy doing, or do we know? Is he attack? Is he a bit of everything?
I'd say he's attack.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was an attacker, and I think that's what he was coming into Armagh for. So I'm sure he'll do a bit of everything. I don't know, is he listed, officially listed as among the management group yet? Maybe not. That might allow him to become a more foreigner or something like that, and
spokesperson.
Something like that. I'd say look, he's 5 years with Armagh, with Kieran McGuinness, with that setup. He's going to bring a lot back to Kerry. And I think it was a very, very good move on Kerry's behalf for Jack to open up the door to an All-Ireland winning management and say, do you know what, we're not fine. We can do with more. And we can do with someone like Kieran Donaghy, who I think after Andy Moran is probably the most infectiously enthusiastic person that you could have around a dressing room.
You need him at Thursday training in this weather.
You do, but the Kieran Donaghy dynamic is interesting because he is coming into a completely different setup in terms of, at Armagh, the luxury is the wrong word because he did a great job, but there was no real linchpin of the attack that was shooting 12 points every game that they had to build the attack around. His strength was moulding Armagh into this unit that was creating scores from everywhere, and they were drumming up big scores, but everybody was chipping in. But now he's going into Kerry, where it's totally different dynamics. There's a Michael Jordan-esque player in there that has to be built around. They have 3 clear players who stand out above everybody else, 2 who are going to do all your scoring. So it's just slightly different in terms of how he manages that, but it probably will help because he's obviously going to put other players into more threatening positions that might drag defenders away from.
They had so much of that game plan ticked last year. I'm not saying that necessarily the All-Ireland final plan is going to work against every team this year, but like, obviously if your defence is out of position and Kerry kick it in quickly, they're going to score. But you saw the way they, it was so good last year just having Paddy Clifford carry the ball through the middle. He has Sean O'Shea on one wing, ready to cut in on his right-hand side. He's David Clifford on the other wing, ready to cut in on his left-hand side. And then you have Gavin White and Joe O'Connor that are sort of running and penetrating. And the 2 midfielders, like they were almost manipulating the shape of the Donegal defence. And once they did that, then they had to give their kickers. And their long-distance kickers are as good as anywhere around. So, like, I'm sure Donaghy brings an awful lot by way of coaching, but even in terms of orientating your attack tactically, like, they were so good at that last year, it's not as if they need a massive upgrade.
No, it's a good problem to have. They have Roscommon on Sunday, Fitzgerald Stadium, 2 o'clock throw in. So, I mean, I know some people don't love the betting odds being read out, but you'd appreciate it somewhat useful at this stage of the season just to get a sense of where the money is. Kerry are absolutely favourites. Donegal are second favourites. And then there's a bit of a jump to Mayo and Tyrone, who are about 10-1. Dublin 12s, Galway 13s, and Armagh have fallen right back to 14-1. So, if you look at the money, Donegal are still best placed to ambush Kerry, challenge Kerry. Jim McGuinness continues. They are Ulster champions. Michael Murphy continues. And Paddy McBurty is obviously retired as their kind of marquee loss. So McGuinness, for much of last year, we kind of clung on to the possibility that McGuinness was cooking something, and waiting you see what he's going to unleash come showtime.
And the final, I think we were first.
Yeah.
Waiting you see, he's been sitting on this all year.
They enjoyed that one in Kerry.
Yeah.
They enjoyed putting one over on him in Kerry and the manner of the defeat, and obviously the Paddy Clifford question and how Donegal dealt with Paddy Clifford has lingered long over the winter, to much glee in Kerry, but to much angst in Donegal, I think. And I haven't seen much from, or heard much from Jim McGuinness, really.
Remind us of the Paddy Clifford one.
Paddy Clifford was basically left to play as he felt. Donegal did not engage him until he came to within a certain point.
They went very zonal.
They did, and Paddy was able to pick and choose as he liked, and generally it was felt, and obviously it's a matter of opinion, and some opinion would say no, they went about it the right way, and Paddy Clifford has all these touches. Now some of them are inconsequential. There's 3 or is it 9? I think he touched the ball 9 times for the last score from David Clifford just before half-time, the 2-pointer that has caused the hooter to go back now for the forthcoming League to sudden end of the games. But Paddy Clifford was pretty much left to do what he liked. He had no one, and obviously there's a difference in opinion there, in that there would be some sense that he should have been tagged everywhere he went, as much as David was by Brendan McCole. Now you can argue, well, Brendan McCole didn't really have a great impact on David Clifford, but Paddy was able to pick and choose and literally untouched for a long time until he went so far, and then someone engaged him, whoever it was. At times it was even Shane O'Donnell, so they were picking up whoever was there. Generally felt that he got an armchair ride in the All-Ireland final, and he was able to pull all the strings when he should have been hassled and harried at a much deeper point further out the pitch.
It made it much harder as well. Like, McCall obviously had a hard job to do, marking David Clifford, but when, like, it's one thing making sure you're the right side of your man. Like, the number of times that David Clifford made his run in field and then he stopped and went back, and that was a sign that McCall was in the right position and doing everything right. But you never get credit for that as the defender. You're gonna lose marks. And I suppose Paddy Clifford got to give the ball to David in whatever capacity he liked. He was able to wait until the run was at the perfect point, the body position where he himself was almost acting as a screen. Yeah. So, I mean, in as much as you put great faith in a defender like Brendan McCall to stop David Clifford, if there's no pressure on the ball that's being given to him, it's no use.
Yeah, it meant that David didn't have to worry about timing his runs perfectly to match how Paddy was getting on against his man. It was like, I get to pick my perfect moment, and I know Paddy's ready to give it to me because he's under no pressure. So it was a terrible situation to put McCall in. That said, for like a lot of the year, Donegal did look good, you know, like phenomenal runners from deep, like that running power. We felt all year that was going to be significant. They were looking decent in attack. So McGuinness has had a long winter to stew. Are we optimistic Donegal are every bit as in the mix as we thought they were for a lot of last year?
Oh yeah, like their baseline's always very high. Like they never really drop. The 2013 the Mayo game, you know, was that really lost in Monaghan, the Ulster Championship. But that's the blip on McGuinness's record. Like,
a lot of injuries that year.
Yeah, and it's unblemished really. Like it's always whatever he does, he brings the ground right up, and Donegal don't drop beneath it, and we can expect that this year. I almost feel a little bit of sympathy. They probably should have changed in game, but it's hard to do. Going into the final, they'd been going so well. We had Philly McMahon in here saying they're the closest thing to Dublin that he had seen, the way they were moving, and they were moving so effortlessly. The runners that you talk about. Going into the final, it must be hard to just say, right, we're doing something different now. I think losing to Kerry will be all the better for them this year, but I think it would have been hard there.
Does it dent the like messianic belief have in McGuinness? You know, the trust in Jim.
Well, his record in Ulster Championships and getting Donegal to All-Ireland finals are just incredible, you know.
But part of that is we do what Jim says, it works.
But this is the big, no great coach ever got to have a long and successful career without at some stage having to change what they do. And like from an attacking point of view, Donegal have loads of scorers. They have just the right kind of scorers as well. They've players who can take the ball at the edge of the D, take a little sidestep, kick the ball over the bar. And the thing about it is they can probably get to a very late point of the summer again before their defence is tested in the same way again. That's the big question for McGuinness. What do you do in the same situation the next time where you have a playmaker, you have a very obvious threat? Because there are lots of coaches out there that will say the conversation afterwards about picking up Paddy Clifford misses the fundamental point that if you mark Paddy Clifford and you mark David Clifford, and then what do you do about Sean O'Shea, and then what do you do about Gavin White when he comes steaming through? All of a sudden, your entire defence is stretched and you leave it open to the fellas who have pace. So for all the scores they got off that, you didn't see the scores they would have got had they tried to prevent that. So, that's... And, where does Jim McGuinness, where do you start from that?
There's an argument, Kerry, give you a bad choice or a worse choice.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So
broadly speaking, Jim McGuinness's record stands out in a county like Donegal that has no great track record of All-Ireland, or even before he came. Ulster's success, they'd won 5 Ulster titles before Jim McGuinness. That's now been doubled and a little bit more. So he's been 6 years manager, and he has 5 Ulster titles. That's the most competitive province.
And we saw
he's been to 5 All-Ireland semi-finals.
We saw where they were
team
in the few years before he took charge.
So you look at all that and you say, well, you can't really take it away from him. I would say, obviously, Paddy Clifford, you'd revise that. I think they'll go about it differently. Maybe not. Maybe there was a systems failure somewhere else that they account for. There has been, obviously, it's, they've debriefed themselves, they've looked at it, but publicly I haven't seen anything about it. And maybe there were reasons for it. They got to within 4 points. I actually think in the All-Ireland final, the last score before half-time was the killer score.
Yeah, it was psychologically so impactful. I'm almost, these kind of questions, they are almost implicit in them, is holding McGuinness to a different standard to every other manager in the country. That he's like some kind of czar, genius, savant. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's ridiculous that Donegal don't win the All-Ireland. That's held against McGuinness. It counted, it's won twice.
Won twice, and Kerry have now won 39. Historically, Kerry have the base for that. So, you go and try and win an All-Ireland title with Donegal.
But I do think it does need to adapt this year. But to Conor's point, and when coaches get together and they crunch the numbers and they look at it back, I think Kerry outscored Donegal by 3 scores. If you're McGuinness there, you're thinking, that's not a lot. If we got a few more 2-pointers, if we cut down the 2-pointers, maybe that's what we need to do.
Yeah, maybe that's the conclusion they'll come to. They'll say, well, actually, we don't mark anybody, and all we do is we push our defensive line out, and we stop the 2-pointer, and if they need to kick it inside, we take our chance that we can stop a goal and they kick a 1-pointer. And that could be the conclusion that you come to. But it was interesting, particularly last year, because of the constant state of flux about the rules. That you really these teams only tested their game plans against one another when it came to the All-Ireland series.
No, it's true. And he was very frustrated with the lateness of the rules. A systems manager, tactical manager, he found that very frustrating. He voiced that displeasure as the league was going on. They are opening round, and it's on TV, prime time, 5 o'clock, Croke Park, Saturday, Dublin against Donegal. So I suspect most people will tune in for that. Which brings us to the Dubs and Ger Brennan. So on last season, they've obviously lost Cluxton. He's still part of the environment. Lost Cluxton and John Small, and who else? That's it. On Dublin, right? Because we're talking there about 2-pointers. Can I just pick up where we left off, which was a bizarre exit to the championship when they lost to Tyrone by 7 points. And it was not just in this game, but it was particularly evident in this game. Their utter refusal to kick 2-pointers. And Dessie Farrell afterwards said, we just don't have the shooters. There was a moment where Kieran Kilkenny, he was approaching the arc. This is Kieran Kilkenny. And he's like, I don't want to. Shit, I have to. And he skied it. It was like all composure was gone. It was very anti-Dublin. They never got to grips with the whole thing.
Even if you go back to the group, Dublin played Armagh in the first game, and they were done 3 times for not having 3 players up. And Armagh, if I remember correctly, kicked all 3 frees from outside. So they conceded 6 points to that. So if we're saying that Kerry were the team that figured the rules out the best, I think Dublin were the sort of elite county that didn't wrap their heads around it at all. It kind of looked like one last season from management and everybody else, and they were trying to just keep going, and they never really innovated in any sort of a sense.
The two shooters that you would think would be capable of 2 points, Paul Mannion, who drifted away after 2024, and Brian Fenton retired. Brian Fenton was so capable of kicking a point from that distance as well. They were the two that you would say. But even during their period of dominance, they didn't really score from long range. Everything was in. That was the systematic way they went. Fenton might have and Mannion might have come out and scored from distance, and maybe he was still inside the arc. But generally, it was within that scoring zone, 20, 30 metres, and that was the system, and that's the system it felt like they were still playing. There were some really bad efforts at 2-pointers during a lot of their games, and I remember that against Tyrone. It was almost forlorn at the end.
There was a game
they were beaten 5-0 in 2-pointers in that final game.
That's right, they were.
Yeah.
There was a game or two before that. There was one game, maybe the 1-2 preceding, where they had about 4,000 wides. Like, it was just comical stuff. You couldn't get your head around what was going on. It was a particularly bad day, but it was just an odd Dublin season.
Now, a player I expect will come through once he's rested from Ballyboden is Ryan O'Dwyer. He looks capable on the basis of his club form of kicking 2-pointers. I think he'll be an asset. Whether he gets up to speed at that level, that's a different question.
I think Dublin have more 2-point kickers than they showed last year.
100%.
Completely.
I think an awful lot of it was the fact that they didn't. Like, I remember that game against Armagh, where they had the 3-up breach 3 times. You were looking at Dublin players that were kind of trying to get on the ball and trying to shimmy into a bit of space along the D, whereas Armagh had. You could see they had like set piece movements to kind of get the ball here, then pop it out sideways. And Dublin seemed to have very little orchestration around how they were going to get their shooters in those positions in the first place. So I'm not sure it's as much about the skill set or the execution. I think it's a tactical coaching thing.
So based on what you saw at Louth, or based on what you know of them generally, or based on what you're hearing through the grapevine around town at the moment, what is the feeling on Ger Brennan's Dublin?
Well, I saw an interview with Greg McEnany saying we're going after 2-pointers more this year.
Oh, did you? Okay. Everything we said the last 5 minutes, it's fine.
But it's a big change, and they're looking. He was saying they hadn't tapped into the rules as much as they could have last year. To Conor's point, I mean, they had Farrell for 6 years, but Farrell was even a continuation from Jim Gavin. His main thing was not to mess this up, keep it going. The last All Ireland they won was the last dance, the real old school boys. Like, so that's 13 years of Jim Gavin and Desiree Farrell. It's a good time to have a new manager. It's fresh. They obviously have a fresh team, and I think that's going to help them now. Like, they do have the 2-point kickers as much as anybody else. Like, right there at the team, you can think of Howard. Kilkenny has it. O'Callaghan has it. McGuinness has it. Like, they have these players that can kick them. Ethan Dunn has it. Like, he's doing it for DCU, but I don't know if he's going to start the whole championship. But these players have it throughout the club championship in Dublin. But I think. Yeah, that's going to be one big improvement anyway, if they're actually buying into a new way of playing.
Like, they're kicking them in minor club games. Do you know what I mean? There's enough footballers in Dublin that can do this.
Where are they in quality at the moment?
I think they have a lot of 7 out of 10 players. Now, what the 7 out of 10 players, if you consider that a lot of their stellar players from the last decade and a half were 8s and a lot of 9s even, I think they have a lot of players at the same level. But even looking at Dublin underage football in the last number of years, Kieran Kilkenny and Jack McCaffrey were being talked about from a long way off. Obviously, Paul Mannion, players like that. There's not really players that are being spoken of in the same vein in any way that have been coming through in recent years, and probably the results reflect that as well. So they have a lot of players of a certain standard. I think for Dublin to thrive, they need everybody right almost all of the time in terms of injuries. They've had a lot of injuries. Owen Merchant will disappear for weeks and months on end with an injury. I think the last 3 out of 4 years, Conor Callan has been carrying issues. The 1 year he wasn't having an issue with an injury was 2023.
He didn't start against Tyrone.
In 2022, he missed the closing stages of the championship. So since 2021, we'll say 3 of those 4 years, they need him right. They need Lee Gannon. Came strong in 2023, but has had numerous injuries as well. So they have to have all of these players. Is Cian Murphy back? He may not be yet, but that's another player that came strong for a couple of years there, and then injury took him as well. So they can't really afford another year of O'Callaghan-led injuries.
I still think if Dublin had everybody available, I still think their attack is one of the top 2 or 3 attacks in the country, in terms of individual talent. Obviously, how you set them up and how you get them into the best positions and everything else, that's another thing. I just don't know. I couldn't. The 4 of us could pick a Dublin midfield pairing, and we could all pick different ones. And by the time championship comes around, it could be a completely different pairing. And we obviously don't know who's going to play in goals. The assumption will be that it's Evan Comerford, because he was the man before Cluxon came back. But
Evan Comerford's a while out of the picture now, considering I think maybe 3 years, you could say. Obviously he's played league, but
I think there's a lot of footballers that were in the Dublin squad that would have had better inter-county careers, but for the fact that they were being kept out of the team by some of the greatest players of all time. And I think what you consider these lads' ability is kind of coloured by that. So in a weird way, I think there's so much sort of erosion or just those players moving on now. It's gotten to the stage where, even from a leadership point of view, like Conor O'Callaghan came in at the back end of the kind of Dublin kind of glory era. He's younger than those, the Paul Mannion and the Brian Fenton, that kind of brigade. So, you'd imagine you'd see players just kind of standing up a little bit more and taking on a bit more responsibility.
So there's a lot of big question marks there, but huge potential. And what are you hearing about Brennan?
Nothing really, like Ger is, Ger is kind of that kind of St. Vincent set. He'd be pretty sort of hard in the way that he goes about it. Like, Ger is a sort of big enough personality as a person to be around, but I think when he gets into the management sphere, he'd be very honest with players. He'll tell them exactly what he thinks of them. There won't be people left in kind of 2 minds or trying to second guess the management. But obviously a lot of it's going to come back down to coaching. That was a big question with Dublin for the last few years. Who's doing the coaching? Who's putting together the game plan? And in some ways, I think the strength of the Dublin talent was able to, keep Dublin at a very high level. It's going to be different now. They have to do better at the rules. They have to kind of, get their best players back onto the pitch and playing in the right roles. So it'll be interesting to see what Dean Rock does. It'll be interesting to see exactly what it is that Stephen Cluxton is doing. I don't think, they still have a goalkeeping coach. That's not Stephen Cluxton. So he's there in some capacity. So I think Brennan is a good figurehead for the overall operation, but he will only be as good as the kind of coaches underneath him, if you want to look at it like that.
Well, that's Croke Park Saturday, 5 o'clock. By the way, just to mention, myself and Colm and Conor did a podcast about this early in January, the Allianz sponsorship. And it had been reported in a big way by RTE, I think in particular, that Dublin footballers, and I think it was up to each team separately, the county board were staying out of it, could decide, and the footballers, it had been reported, had decided not to do any interviews in front of any Allianz branding, post-match in particular. This is on the back of Francesca Albanese's report, which showed that PIMCO bought $960 million worth of Israeli-issued bonds in the last couple of years. So that was kind of taken as, well, I mean, RTE, multiple sources. I think David Hickey and several other former players wrote a letter to Ger Brennan congratulating the team and saying they would be remembered as a courageous team for years to come. And then Greg McEnany of the Dublin panel was interviewed yesterday, and he was asked about this stance that they were reportedly taking, and he said, to be honest, I was literally scrolling through Instagram, and the first I saw was on the Sunday Game post. They posted it. We have never spoken about it. We've never had anything. For me, I don't really have an opinion on it. I don't know enough about the subject. I'll be just there to play football on Saturday, I suppose. And he was sort of asked, are you sure? Like, were you out that day? You know? And he's like, no, it was not discussed at all. We actually aren't sure at all where the source is from. It has not been discussed once. So remains to be seen on Saturday what happens. David Hickey and
I'd be surprised if a Dublin player is interviewed behind or in front of Allianz branding on Saturday evening. I'd be surprised if players from Armagh or Tyrone will be interviewed in front of Allianz branding. They are two of the 6 counties from Ulster who put forward motions to Central Council and to Congress. I'm not sure which motion was going where. There's 9 counties in all. I would say Tyrone and Armagh would be 2 that could potentially decline alliance branding. I don't think the issue will be forced either in any way. I don't think there'll be any penalty or anything like that. I think they just let it. Whoever makes their mind up to do that makes their mind up to do that.
Okay. Right, well, let's round off Division 1 then. Mayo and Galway of interest, Armagh of interest. I guess Mayo are kind of juicy. They're always something going on. But Andy Moran's come in, as you said, Colm. He's just one of those infectious characters, enthusiasm, talks with energy, moves with energy. And Mayo need it, because you can forget they went out of the round robin stages last year. You know, Cavan pipped them in that group with Donegal and Tyrone. And I guess allied to the Moran enthusiasm, likeability, which you suspect will put bums on seats again in Castlebar, which was an issue, you know, the last couple of years. Attendance is even down at Mayo games. At 33 years of age, Cillian O'Connor is back. Robbie Henley is back. James Carr is back. Paddy Talley's been added to the backroom team. Oh my God, could this be the year? So Mayo.
I think Andy Moran is facing the same challenge as Ger Brennan that we've just discussed, is that they have a team that was set up not to score 2-pointers last year, and the record showed it, because in 6 championship games they scored 3 2-pointers, which was 0.5 average, by far the lowest of the 32 counties. Their return was really, really poor.
Do you think this is just... this question is plucked in the last 3 seconds. Mayo traditionally not good shooters. It's in the DNA. Therefore, long shooting, we're just stopping all that. We're going to master percentage scoring. And now for Mayo to rediscover long shooting will be an arduous journey.
It will be an arduous journey, but it's a journey they have to take on, because any team that leaves the station without numerous 2-point options is not going to get to their destination.
Cillian O'Connor just going to hang around the...
Well, O'Connor and
45.
Rob Henley are 2 huge.
Rob Henley is a big addition for 2-pointers. He's already been at it, kicking long-range frees. If you remember, even though he needed a second chance, he brought the Dublin All-Ireland semi-final in 2021 from the 45-metre line. He has that range, and whether he still has that range, but I think he has, because he's been doing it for Raheny.
For Raheny in Parnell Park a couple of years ago on a woeful night on a heavy pitch. Yeah. And his ball striking was absolutely incredible.
As an aside, have to tell this story. Brian Fenton was in with us recently. Brian Fenton had been listening to a recent podcast we had done where we were talking about super clubs. And I had sort of said to Conán, but like, are there any, you know, because all these guys, they're joining the super clubs. Are there any, like, and tongue-in-cheek question, I said, are there any players who've joined, like, dud clubs? And Conán straight away said, Rob Henley Raheny. Fast forward a week later, Brian Fenton and I, we do a long interview. I feel like Brian's tired, we're done. Listen, I'll let you get going. He's like, no, that's all fine, interview's great. Come here, is Conán in today? I need a word with him.
You did not say dud clubs.
No, I didn't say dud clubs.
And I did see Raheny this year as well, and Henley scored 4 2-pointers as well, so this guy is still at it.
Okay.
In a
what do we think on Mayo, fellas?
I think the enthusiasm will be strong. I think the interest will be back. The addition of those players, that's mixed opinion about that. But I think Henley had to come back because Colm Reap has gone travelling and the backup might not have been as strong. So that was a choice. I think Cillian O'Connor was always going to come back. He left, obviously, under a little bit of a cloud last year. But he left nonetheless. Unusual time in his career to go, but I always felt he was going to come back at least for one more year under new management. So there'll be an addition around the place, but
like, it's interesting. Kerry favourites, Donegal second favourites, Mayo are third with Tyrone. They feel like more of an outside bet than they should be third in the pecking order.
I'd have Armagh way ahead of.
I would have Armagh ahead of them too, but I think there's nothing between any of those teams. Right. Donegal, just for me, might be a little bit ahead. Armagh, Noreen O'Neill, looks like in the early stages of the league they're going to be without a few players.
Stephen Campbell's gone.
Stephen Campbell is gone. Obviously, Oisín Connaughty and Darragh McMullen are 2 very, very good young players. Connaughty's a back-to-back all-star. Yeah. McMullen is a brilliant talent who will drive them on. But I don't think there's a whole lot between any of the chasing pack.
Armagh are funny because that first half against Kerry was just normal. and then what happened.
Yeah.
So
The
who
only
knows
two teams they
how
lost to last year.
recover from that. Kerry
Donegal and
Kerry.
Kerry, like the two All-Ireland
I thought they
finalists.
should have beaten Donegal in
Exactly.
the Ulster final. I thought the timing of Kerry's goals, or Donegal's goals, was perfect. Because I thought they might have been just starting to flag a little bit, and they got the injection
Yeah.
of both goals, and obviously went on to win in extra time. But Mayo, it's interesting. They're excited about a few new forwards that have come in off
Colby
the
gonna
under.
get any
Off the
game
under.
time?
I think he will.
Yeah.
I don't see how he wouldn't. How when he commits to playing with the Mayo seniors, and he knows he's going at the end of the year. Presumably that's still on. He knows he's going at the end of the year. He needs preparation for that, and he needs to be able to stand up in the rough and tumble of intercounty football. And he's an exceptional talent with a long range. He can score off the ground, out of his hands, from that distance. I think he'd be a big asset as the season goes on. Yeah. He's only turned 18 last month or the month before, so he's very, very young. But he's very accomplished with Crossmolina last year, with the Mayo Miners in recent years. I think you won't see him all the time, but I think we'll see impact off him.
They need to. Like, no team was as one-dimensional last year as Mayo were in trying to get the ball to Ryan O'Donoghue. Like, it was clear that they needed him on the ball, and he was the only guy who was going to shoot from outside. And even, like, they only just got Diarmuid O'Connor back for that game against Cavan, and then was it a shoulder or something he hurt again? He's a huge player for them, and same with Paddy Durkin. He only just got back. So, like, if they had everybody and they got a bit out of some of the younger players coming through, there'd be a serious prospect. But it's hard to see how they're going to set their attack up in a way, because like Tommy Conroy, obviously he was out last year as well, but again, he's a guy who likes to kind of take his man on rather than go back outside and kick long range free. So it'll be just no more than Dublin. How they set up their attack will be really interesting.
Okay.
I saw a team sheet for a challenge that Mayo played against Clare last week, and it's been going around. Ryan O'Donoghue has been at centre forward, so that might be a development with regard to Mayo, because he is their one assured 2-point kicker.
Well, they're at Pearse Stadium on Sunday against Galway, 1:45. You can almost bet the wind will be blowing, so we'll get an early sense if this whole first half, second half, huge weighting of the wind has an impact on things. Let's finish Division 1 on Galway then. Porrick Joyce, another year. Feels like we've been saying that for a little while. Obviously made finals in 22 and 24. My memory of Galway last year is a constant Shane Walsh body not right, Colm body not right. Will they, won't they come good in time? Porrick Joyce rejecting the notion that those two, that we're a two-man team, and people saying, yeah, they're not a two-man team, but deep down, I think you need those guys right. And then losing to Meath by a point, and Joyce decides to stay on. So final in 22, final in 24. The John Nashes of the room would suggest every second year.
There's no doubt, and this is harping back to 24. That was a real missed opportunity for Galway this year. Not sure were they ever really at it. They won the Connacht Connacht final because Mayo couldn't win it.
Should have beaten them.
20 minutes to go. I felt there was only one winner that day.
Yeah.
And they scrambled after that. They got back at Dublin, but Dublin broke, and the Derry game was a real battle. And even against Armagh in the last qualifier game, when Armagh had already topped the group, that was a struggle to come and win that. And against Meath, they got ahead and let it slip, which is not a great sign. That's not a great sign. Not sure whether Comer and Walsh will be available to them in the early rounds of the league. Suggestions from Galway are that they won't. There's an element of doubt, as per Porrick Joyce himself in a recent media call, about Paul Conroy. They hope he comes back, but it hasn't been confirmed. Maybe he is now. And John Maher, who I think is a big force for them, he's injured. I think he's going to miss the early part of the league. I'm not sure for how long. Right. And Matthew Thompson has gone to Berkeley in California on Erasmus. Right. So he's a global business student, and he's taken a great opportunity there.
Here's what the casual at-a-glance sense of Galway is. Their window has closed.
I don't know. I still think that they have an awful lot of... Like, Thompson is a big blow because he looked like the sort of fella that you could make a case that Galway were still All-Ireland contenders without Comer and Walsh. Because, like, Thompson was incredible last year. Do you remember up in Newry, he was sensational that day. Himself and Oran Murdoch put on two of the best individual performances.
Yeah, and against Dublin. He was very, very good against Dublin and Salthill.
And, like, they get more out of sort of Killian McDade and further up the pitch. But not to simplify it too much, and maybe this is reductive, I think the difference between Galway with Walsh and Comer and without them is the difference between All-Ireland contenders and not.
Well, last year especially when they had Finnerty and Thompson so hot for most of the championship. Like Finnerty was amazing all year, and if you had Shane Walsh was great against Armagh, was it? But if you had those two at it all year round, then you would have 4 players. With Killian McDade, the whole attack would have been lighting it up.
I mean, Comer probably has missed more championship minutes than maybe any other player of his genre over the last number of years. He's perpetually out of the picture because of injury, because it's an issue. When he's there, he's a handful.
Yeah.
He really, really draws defences into him. They have to watch him.
Yeah.
How many of the 8 get relegated? 2?
2.
Yeah.
There's the trend in Division 1 is always that the team that gets promoted, teams that get promoted are most vulnerable to go back down. Now, Donegal and Armagh 2 years ago and Dublin Derry the year before that were probably exceptions. Derry have gone back down since. Roscommon have moved up and down. Anytime they've been promoted, they've been relegated either the following year or the year after. So I think without their St. Bridget's players, there might be anything up to 9 of them in the early games. And I presume they're not coming back for this weekend in Kerry. I think they're vulnerable along with Monaghan.
Yeah, Brian Stack actually apparently fractured ribs in that All-Ireland club final, and the performance he put on was incredible. But you'd like to think they'd give him a couple of weeks off at least, just to get himself right with that, because I know he's captain, I know he's one of the hardiest players in the game, but he definitely deserves a bit of a rest at the minute.
Yeah, okay. I'd ask you who's going to win the thing, but you need to know who wants to win the thing, so I don't know what to say there. You know what I mean?
I think Kerry have 4 home games, and they're against Roscommon, Monaghan, Galway and Mayo.
So they'll be in the final.
So 4 wins there, 1 on the road, 10 points, they're going to make a final. I think Mayo and Dublin will both have the desire and the interest and the energy to go and join them.
Okay, well that's tasty. That's fun.
Yeah, I think we take that, would we?
Yeah. I just asked you before we started anything you want to talk about. Obviously, look, we can't go through all 4 divisions. We'd be here forever. But straight away, you all said Division 2 is tasty. I feel like people say that every year. It's the sweet spot.
Well, can I broaden that a small bit? I don't know that there's a team in Division 2 that doesn't sort of feel that the step to Division 1 is either one that they should be taken or one that they could be taken and would be hugely beneficial. Those games in Division 1 are savage. They really do tell you where you are. But if we could just, if you look at the bottom of the Division 2 table and the top of the Division 3 table,
okay,
there's serious ramifications there, because for the last few years, there have been teams who are outside the top 16 in the league who have made their provincial final, Clare being an obvious example. But if you look at the draws this year, and not to preempt anything, it does look like it's very unlikely that any team from Division 3 or Division 4 will make their provincial final. You also have a situation where Kildare are Tailteann Cup champions, so they're in the All-Ireland series this year, come hell or high water. So if Kildare finish in the top 6 in Division 2, i.e. if they're not relegated, for the first time ever, the 2 teams that come up from Division 3 will go into the All-Ireland series, and the 2 teams relegated from Division 2 will miss it out. So in as much as we're a long way away from the start of the championship, if you're in Division 2 or you're in Division 3 and you get off to a bad start or a good start in the case of Division 3, all of a sudden your entire season looks hugely different.
Okay, that sets it up. As it goes, week 1 in Division 2, Meath, I guess, kind of one of the fairy tale stories of last year, have Derry. That's at Croke Park on Saturday. All Meath games will be Croke Park as they renovate Pork Talchin. We have Tyrone against Kildare. That's in Omagh. We have Cork against Cavan. That's down in Cork. And then we have Offaly against the Leinster champions, Louth. So Meath Derry, I guess people are very familiar with Meath last year. Conán, given what they did, the feel-good story, beat Galway, as we said, a first All-Ireland semi-final since 2009. Jordan Morris, etc. People are very curious to see what they do this year. And then against Derry, who still really, the Rory Gallagher ending, they just have not recovered from fully.
Well, the Donegal game in 2025 or 2024, they haven't recovered from up at Celtic Park.
Yeah.
They won the league after Rory Gallagher, Mickey Hart came in, and it looked like, I remember at the time people talking about Derry, Dublin, Kerry, that's the top 3 now. They've cut off from the rest of them. And then, sure, they haven't won a
No.
championship match since, apart from the Westmeath match they drew with Mayo.
They've Kieran Meena back, Conor, who was obviously took over in 2023 after everything. And they produced that performance against Kerry in the All-Ireland semi-final. And then Kieran Meena did not get the job after Mickey Hart. And now he's back. So I think it's interesting that they've come back to Kieran Meena and he's left down as a coach and he's now in with them. So I sense this is the fresh start.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that Kieran Meena didn't want the main job at the time.
Right.
Which was people, especially after the Kerry match, especially after the Kerry interview, the pride you had as a Derry man, like you had Kerry down the stretch, you were 2 points up with 7 minutes to go, and then the manager's coming out afterwards, and he used it, I'll never forget it, he used the term, quote unquote, we cut them to shreds. But you had to go at them.
They did go at, like, the reason you thought he would likely get the job is it was such a dynamic performance.
Yeah.
They did rip Kerry to shreds.
Yeah.
They just ran at them all day. It was brilliant.
And from that moment, because the year before was the Galway performance semi-final, and Derry felt so far away from an All-Ireland, even though they'd broken through and won Ulster for the first time in a long time. But from that moment, the players believed, and I still believe that they do, that they could win an All-Ireland, that they're not that far away, that they had Kerry, and they just let it get away.
Why did he not want it, do you suspect, or have you heard?
I think the Gallagher thing was just so messy at the time. He had been used to being a coach. He went away, went with down. Last year, I was talking about him, and I said, like, this guy could be one of the best managers around. And I didn't know Derry were going to go back for him, but I thought it was surprising that he was just in with Conor Laverty, doing a great job there. And Down looked good last year. Then he went in with Loch McCrory this year, again under the manager, and they went won their own championship. So he has something. The players love him. If you hear the way they talk about him. And he is the one, like Rory Gallagher gets credited for taking Derry from Division 4 to 1. He actually didn't. It was Damien McArleen that was the manager in Division 4. But Kieran Meena is the only link. Like, he was there in Division 4 under McArleen, and Gallagher came in Division 3. Like, Gallagher deserves a lot of credit as well, but Meena took them the whole way up, and the way the players talk about him. There was an interview of Conor Doherty recently just talking about the analysis that Kieran Meena does with them, and he would use other players, like Jack McCaffrey was one of the ones that he talked about, Lee Keegan, and Kieran Meena sort of profiling players to say, this is what you should be doing. And you can see the improvement in all of them over the years, and it's very exciting. He's an attack-minded coach in an attack-minded game now. And you have Derry coming in with Gareth McKinless, who was missing last year. Conor McCluskey was missing last year. Pádraig McGrugan. That's 3 of your back 6.
All right, bit of cold water in this.
In a new game.
Bit of cold water over there.
You need your defenders more than ever, and I do have them back. Owen Lynch is still missing. Owen McAvoy is still missing. Derry still don't have a squad.
But the vibes are good.
Vibes are good, but Derry are still very reliant on having 15 players available throughout the whole year, so it would be a big ask to actually compete for the
I just suspect they're slightly shortchanged up front.
Yeah, I think so. It's the reinforcements coming in off the bench. Like Shane McGuigan can't do it all the time.
What kind of season will Meath and Louth have again? Our Leinster finalists last year.
I think it'd be a challenge for Meath. Division 2 has always been a challenge. They've been, I think it's 11 in the last 12 years they have been a Division 2 team. I think they overachieved last year. There's no doubt about that from where they were. I think Robbie Brennan even pointed out this time last year they were being touted as potential relegation, one of the 2 teams to go down.
Am I right? Was Robbie Brennan one of the few managers this time last year who was saying, well, this isn't Gaelic football anymore? He didn't like
He had an outburst after the Westmeath game that he says he was comparing it to basketball and soccer and everything else. He said it wasn't Gaelic football, but the rules served his team very well because they were among the most proficient 2-pointers in the game, and they had a wide spread of them right through the Leinster Championship and beyond. But I think they'll be up against it. Tyrone and Derry are probably, I think, they've come down like Division 1. The team that goes up comes back down in 2. Generally happens. The team that comes down goes back up. Tyrone and Derry will be strong. And then there's that group of teams that are all not much between any of them. Cork, I think Kildare will be back in among the mix, Cavan and Meath. So I think Meath can finish mid-division. I think if they do, they should be happy with that. There'll be an ambition, of course, to go up to Division 1. But against Tyrone and Derry and not having home advantage in Park Dalton, Croke Park is a little bit more neutral. I think teams will enjoy coming and playing them there. And I think Louth will be competitive under Gavin Devlin. I think the players will be happy with that appointment. They'll kick on. And they have players off their under-20 squad that can fill in any gaps that are there. But I think they'll be ambitious enough. Kind of disappointed after the Leinster final. They'd be disappointed with themselves, how they played, losing heavily to Donegal. They lost to Monaghan, lost to Down in the round robin. So there'll be a bit of pickup from that, and they'll be challenging hard too for Division 2.
Okay. Anything from Divisions 3 or 4 you're looking at for Conor?
Well, I think Down are going to win Division 3. They've been kind of bubbling under the surface for quite a while. And given what's at stake, I don't think they can, like Down were in the last 12 last year and they only lost by 2 points at home to Galway. So they were very close to being a kind of top 8 team, if you want to call it like that. They're the side. But it's, Division 4 is very hard to predict. Like last year, Wexford and Limerick came out of nowhere. Like Wexford won 7 games in a row in Division 4. Limerick had a change of management and nearly an entire new squad, and there was nothing expected of them, and they had a great year last year. So that one's very difficult to predict, but up around the top end of Division 3, it's going to be very, very spicy because there's an awful lot at stake.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to see the coaching innovations with the new rules now that it's into the second year, to see what comes up. Towards the end of last year's All-Ireland Championship, you had the Kerry midfielders moving in to the edge of the square. They had to be occupied to create that opportunity to get the best kickers of the ball out around the arc. You mentioned the kickouts. How are they going to be retained? How are they going to be pressed and defended? I think all those innovations, I think we see a lot more kicking this year rather than that static lateral game that Mayo played a lot of last year and a few others too. I think we'll see a bit more ambition and risk as the year goes on.
Yeah, there is a general trend that I think we'll see more of, which is after years and years and years of possession being so important, and you had to keep control of the ball to the point where you had a high percentage scoring chance. There's almost now a sort of an unsaid kind of agreement that we can take a bit more of a kick here because if we lose the ball, we will get it back.
Yeah.
That was the problem before. Teams just went too long chasing the ball around and they just didn't move. Whereas now I think when people get possession of the ball, they kind of know what they're going to face. If you get the ball down to this position, the opposition's defence are going to be set up in this situation. So there's more of a... I remember being at league games in particular last year and even early championship games where teams were winning the ball in midfield and then turning around. And in as much as they were trying to look at what was ahead of them for their own players, they were trying to figure out exactly what shape the opposition were kind of setting up in and where the spaces were. But I think teams are much more used to it now. And even from the point of view of, like, every inter-county team has a team of analysts and they've processed all the numbers now. They know, even based on the evidence of 1 year, like where's the most beneficial places to put the ball, where are the highest percentage scoring chances. And as Colm says, like the 2-pointer now is just so much more valuable. Like they talk about it a lot in basketball now, that the 3-pointer has completely taken over, that teams will gladly try and miss 3-pointers because over the course of the game, if you try them the most, you'll end up kicking enough of them that they make up. So we think we'll see a huge amount of that this year.
See, I saw a heat chart about basketball's transformation is in circulation from where the source of the shots, it completely transformed the game.
There's not a single sport that has trended more towards conservatism. Basketball is the obvious comparison with Gaelic games, but like you name the sport, things like golf, which don't feel applicable, it's now a sport where you drive the ball, hit it as hard as you can, and go and find it. The days of, find the fairway, Jim Gavin, take your point, that's antiquated. Snooker.
Nearly cost Rory McIlroy conservatism on the 13th.
Exactly.
Last year, didn't it?
Yeah. So I think, 2-pointers, pretty soon there won't be, if you're an inter-county footballer, the next generation, you can't kick a 2-pointer. Like in the same way that in golf at university, it's like, what's his swing speed? Oh no, he's not, he doesn't count. Pretty soon we'll have forwards, unless they're like the Gooch. If you can't kick a 2-pointer, you're just not even, I'll work with the 2-pointers. It's going to be that kind of a thing. I'm fascinated. I was going to say I'm worried. I really enjoyed the league last year, so I'm not worried. But I do sort of agree, Colm, earlier on, like what type of games we'll get. There is something with these rules. They may just not be great in the bad weather with high winds. Because the 2-pointer is such an advantage and the wind obviously is such a factor. And then if you just have to kick the ball out a certain distance from a kick out, it is just going to hang in the wind. You are just going to be that defender standing under it waiting to get smashed. I wouldn't be shocked if we have 10-point turnarounds again routinely.
I think we'll see them. I think that's a factor. There was more giving out about during the league last year about the rules, I sensed, than there was during the championship, and that was probably weather related.
I think so. But what can you do? We're a windy island off the west coast of Europe.
Yeah,
But that's good though, right? Having the contest under a high ball that's hanging. I think there'll be more turnovers. I think teams will look at what's happened last year and they'll be determined to not be dictated to as much. Like if you take Donegal's example, letting Paddy Clifford run free because they're worried about Mark O'Shea running into full forward. Teams will be ahead of that now. They'll all be thinking about the second and third step rather than like, let's get Mark O'Shea. Be like, no, lads, we have 4 players in the full back line. We have a sweeper in front of him. If the ball goes in there, we'll deal with it. No, we need to push out more. So I think you'll start to see teams being a bit more sophisticated. And maybe now more than ever, we're sort of moving into an era of management and coaching. That's, how teams are setting up and what managers are actually doing is going to be more important than it probably ever has been.
Have they all been out doing warm weather training? What's all that going on? We're Donegal in the Middle East again. Is any of that?
Well, Kobe McDonald. Can I just say, like, if anybody doubted Andy Moore's chops as a GA manager, I mean, what a classic example of, here, you'll come down to training on Tuesday, won't you? Just come down, hang around with the boys. You come to Portugal, won't you? And now he's involved and he's coming into the National League panel.
And they had Oisin Mullen
Yeah.
in Portugal as well.
Trojan horse, Andy
as he continued his pre-season AFL training. So that was
I remember.
maybe that was a deposit for the future.
I remember a time. Was Kieran made try out audition once again, and there was a big furore around that when he was coming back.
Wow.
There was something. He's a bit like an A-lister. I don't audition for movies. You either pick me or not. All right, fellas.